honour and a privilege to be here speaking to you. This is my first time ever in the Ukraine, and I've already met some passionate video game developers. EA has a tool to help us collaborate around the world, because Criterion's an electronic arts studio, and it lets us profile different countries of how do people like to work from different cultures around the world. So I'm a British person working for an American company. And these are what the Globe Smart tool says is the typical profile on these 5 vectors of how people from those countries like to work. This is merged from research they've done in those countries and from people filling out their questionnaire on their site. So you can see that American people and British people, typically, they're on this left-hand side. They like to be independent rather than interdependent. They like to take quite a lot of risk, and they're quite task more than relationship oriented. So I thought it would be quite interesting then to look at the Ukraine profile on there as well, as I was coming out to speak with you all this week. And you can see that it's quite different to the typical British and indeed the American. In particular, I noticed that according to this, Ukrainian people are typically very relationship-oriented, and those who are relationship-oriented, according to the site, tend to view time-building relationship as key to achieving good results. But they may also prioritize maintaining relationships over accomplishing tasks on time. I don't know if that feels fair to you. But I was really excited when I saw that profile, because also the site lets you put your own profile in, and there's mine. So I'm actually more typically Ukrainian, according to this website, than I am British. So I hope we're going to get on just fine. So in that excellent introduction, you heard about a lot of the games I've worked on since I entered the industry in 1995. So I've been making video games now for 25 years, which really makes me feel quite old. But in many ways, I've grown up with this industry. Even when I first started, I've been in a leadership position all the time. So there was never really that person, those sort of 5-10 years older than me, to like kind of put their hand on my shoulder and kind of say, like, you're making some really obvious mistakes here. What I've learned through my leadership journey, I've really learned through making a lot of mistakes. And in keeping with the industry norms, I've worked incredibly hard on those video games. And about 6 years ago, that culture of crunching and working so intensely really caught up with me. And I burnt out. And I had to have 3 months off of work with what was later diagnosed as stress-induced depression. And I made a decision when I came back from that illness that there had to be a better way of working. It had to be fun to make fun. We all make fun for a living, so surely we should be having some fun while we're doing that. And we've changed a huge amount of things inside Criterion to make that the case. So some things I wanted to share with you today about things I've learned from my leadership journey that I hope as you build an industry of your own, making video games here in the Ukraine, you can learn from some of my mistakes, hopefully, along the way. Yeah, so I work for Criterion. We are a studio in the UK, based just south of London in a city called Guildford. We're wholly owned by Electronic Arts since 1995, actually. Really well known for the Burnout series, for the shooter Black, and also for Need for Speed Hot Pursuit and Need for Speed Most Wanted. And most recently, we've been working collaboratively with other EA studios on these great titles. And our most recent work is on Firestorm for Battlefield 5, the Battle Royale mode. And so these are games that have been made, AAA games with development teams up to 650 people across 3 locations, which then extends wider into outsourcing teams in China, and our testing and our marketing partners. So it could be well over 1,000 people working on games. We're very proud that recently The changes we've made in how we work at Criterion has resulted in the studio being voted the best studio to work for in the games industry in the UK over the last 3 years. So it's been a real change and a real learning journey for me and for the other leaders at my studio. So what have I learned over that time? So one of the biggest things I've learned along the way is that developing yourself as a leader and as a game maker is exactly the same thing as developing your game. So we know that organizations typically are built in the image of their leader, and if you truly believe that, then it follows that developing yourself is developing your team. But I believe it actually runs a lot deeper than that. So Pythagoras, he of the triangle fame, he studied Hermetic mysticism. So this idea of being connected to a whole is a really ancient idea. So for him, there was this idea from mysticism, the phrase was as above, so below. Pythagoras' version of that is the microcosm is the macrocosm. So that is the idea that the self, the microcosm, and the universe, the macrocosm, are the same, and changes in one necessarily affects changes in the other. So centuries ago, Pythagoras had this idea that things were connected beyond the most obvious level. But modern psychological science can give us more information on that with the idea of how the energy and the emotions that we bring into the game development studio every day are actually contagious. So what scientists have found is that our emotions leak via micro-expressions. We can't help it happening. We might try and be showing ourselves to feel one way, but how we actually feel will leak out of tiny little micro-expressions. And what those psychologists have also found is that we tend to mimic others' expressions. So if we see someone smiling, we tend to smile back with them without actually processing that. Furthermore, they found that we feel the emotions we express as well as expressing the emotions that we feel. So when we smile, we feel happy. If we frown, we feel angry, as well as smiling because we feel angry. So you follow that logic through, that we are leaking our emotions, we're copying each other's emotions, and we feel the emotions that we express. We're actually infecting one another with our emotions and moods all the time, whether we want to or not. So hopefully you can see why I believe that to be the case. There's a psychologist called Robert Rosenthal, and he's done a great deal of research on these so-called expectancy effects. One experiment he did is he took a bunch of research students and he gave each of them rats to train to get out of a maze. And he told one group of researchers that their rats were maze dull, that they would be stupid and they wouldn't be able to get out of the maze. And he told another set of developers that their rats were really, really smart and they would be able to solve the maze really quickly. In practice, the rats were exactly the same. They were all bought from the same company that supplied rats for research in labs. And when he got the results back, the results weren't even close. The results of the so-called dull rats were way worse than the so-called smart rats, even though they're exactly the same. And what they found was that there was all these little micro behaviors that the individual researchers were engaging in, like if you handle a rat more, it will perform better. And they found that they were handling them less if they thought they were stupid than if they thought they were smart. So it's really true that you get what you expect and you deserve what you tolerate at a really basic human level. So hopefully you can see why I believe from a scientific level that developing yourself is developing your game. So I believe that every game is a reflection of those who make it. And when I look back at those games you saw on my first slide, every one of those was a reflection of the team that made that game. So if we are, contagiously infecting our teams with our emotions, and we're making games a reflection of ourselves, and we get what we expect and we deserve what we tolerate, then hopefully you can see why I believe that developing yourself is the same thing as developing your game. So, So before we get into it, how we develop yourselves and your teams, let's take a look at what I believe a game team you might lead would need from you as a leader, and what I've found my game teams need from me. But let me first say this, that I love game makers. These are my people. How many people here make games for a living? Awesome. So this is my tribe. This is my people, and this is actually the main reason I've come all the way out to Kiev is to spend time with you people. Is because I love spending time with game makers. I think the most amazing people in the world. Certainly the most creative, diverse, and interesting set of people. And one of the reasons I think is it takes such a different set of people to make video games. So if we just think of a 2x2 on two different things, about having an arts education or a science education, on being a sequential or a procedural thinker, or an associative kind of, which you would more think of as like a creative thinker, then you can look at all of the different crafts we need to make a video game across this 2x2. And you might disagree with exactly where I've put an individual craft, especially if it's your own. But the point is that there's all these different knowledge and ways of thinking that we need to somehow put together to make an incredible video game. And I believe that your team's needs are the same as your players' needs. So I believe you engage your team as a leader in exactly the same way as you engage your player as a game designer. So becoming an expert in human motivation will make you not only a better game designer, but a better game team leader as well. So let me tell you why I think that. I'm going to talk about two books here. The first is Drive by the American author Daniel Pink, and the second is Glued to Games by Rigby and Ryan, who run a Californian games consultancy called Immersive. So both of these, all of these authors, I should say, have studied human behavioral science, but they've used it in very different ways. So let's deal with Pink first. So the premise of Pink's book is that there's a big gap between what science knows and what business does when it comes to motivation. He's not talking about the games industry specifically, but it applies to us in the workplace as leaders of game teams. And he says that once you are paid fairly, so that means you know you're getting something fair versus the market in which you live and fair versus the other people within doing the similar role within your team, then more money isn't going to make you more motivated or engaged, which is not to say we don't all want more money, because we can always find something to do with it. It just won't make us any more engaged or motivated to make our game. And so if it's not about that, then what is it about? And he identifies three things which do make people more engaged and motivated at work. And the first of those is autonomy. So that's the desire to direct our own lives rather than being controlled and penned into one particular way of working. The second of those is mastery, which Pink defines as becoming better at something that matters. That means it matters to us individually. We have to care about it for it to be really motivational and engaging. And the third of Pink's three is purpose. And for humans, it turns out that we cannot really lead a life that is truly excellent without feeling that we belong to something greater and more permanent than ourselves. Pink is defining purpose as that feeling of belonging to something that's greater and more permanent than ourselves. So that's a quick run through what Pink is telling us of how we can engage our teams at work from science. Let's turn to Rigby and Penn now. So Rigby and Penn have studied the same science, but they're applying it to how we can motivate players inside of our games and how we can design our games more effectively to keep our players engaged and motivated by the games we make. So they talk about autonomy as well, in the same way that Pink does, and they say feeling autonomous means that we're pursuing things that interest us and that we want to pursue. By contrast, we feel controlled and we're not interested in what we're doing, and we're simply taking one action after another. That player isn't going to stay in your video game very long. Sounds very similar to what we've talked about before. The interesting thing that Rigby and Penn add on to this as well, they call it volitional engagement, is that it works even if the game's completely linear. So as a player, even if I know exactly what's going to happen when I press next, the act of playing next keeps me more engaged in that video game than if it was simply proceeded without me doing anything as a player. So even for a linear game, that volitional engagement, as he calls it, is really powerful. They also talk about competence inside a video game and how getting better at a game is something that keeps us engaged and motivating and getting in carrying on playing that game. Even so, I play FIFA for probably 25 hours a week, and I still feel like I'm getting better at it, and that keeps me playing. I'm actually probably not. I'm probably about the same standard I've been for the last 10 years, but I like to feel like I'm getting better at it, and it keeps me playing. And the third of those, for Rigby and Penn, is this idea of relatedness within a video. So this is similar to Pink's idea of purpose, but this is the feeling that as a player, we want to know that we matter to the events and the characters inside the game world. So we want to see what we're doing as a player reflected by the events in the game. Even so, if we plant a tree in a farming simulator, we want to see the characters turn and acknowledge that new tree and be impressed by it. They're acknowledging our action in the world. And it's that element of recognition that I think is actually probably missing from Pink's model, actually. So if we see what we're doing in a game world reflected, then it keeps us engaged and motivated in the video game. So if we put those two models next to each other, Pink's autonomy and Rigby and Ryan, you can see very much how Pink's mastery is the same as Rigby and Ryan's competence, and how the relatedness concept from Rigby and Ryan builds on the purpose concept that Pink identifies. And if we put those together, then what can we do at work that takes advantage of all these insights into how we might motivate our team? So for autonomy, we want to maximize our game team's choice over team, task, and technique. So that is who they work with, what they work on, and how they work on it. For mastery and competence, we want to agree challenges with our developers that are in the mastery zone. So the mastery zone is the space beyond what I know I can do and short of what I know I can't do. That's the mastery zone where we want all our developers to be. And for purpose and relatedness, I think it's important for us as leaders to set an inspiring vision, not just of the game we're making, but also of the studio. So there has to be some purpose. So for us at Criterion, it's about finding that healthy way to make AAA. That we want people to be engaged and motivated in that as much as they are caring about the video game we're making. And we found that to be really powerful. So with all that in mind, I believe that, as I've said, your team's needs are the same as your players' needs, and you engage your team the same way you engage your player. So hopefully you'll all want to become an expert in human motivation and become better game designers and team leaders as a result. So before I talk more about the style of leadership I find that works for me, I first would like to talk about the leader who nobody wants. So in her excellent book, The Fearless Organization, Amy Edmondson describes the perils of a culture based on fear. That it will gain compliance over time, but stores danger in achieving long-term strategic goals in complex interdependent environments like making a AAA video game. And she has great examples of where that's gone horribly wrong, of how VW's engineers were all brought into a room and told if they couldn't make VW's cars meet these emission targets, they would all be fired. And as we know from history, VW made those emission targets, but they cheated to get there. And when that came out, it was very embarrassing for the company and public. There's a air crash that happened in Tenerife, where famously the co-pilot knew that the air traffic control had not given them clearance to proceed for takeoff. But the pilot believed they had. But the co-pilot did not feel confident enough to speak out to say what he believed would happen. And one plane hit another one before either of them got in the air, and 76 people died. So it's dangerous to have the leader who leads by fear in a very real way. So what do we want instead of that? And Edmondson gives us a great model for psychological safety, because building this doesn't mean we don't ask a lot of our teams. We do. So we think of a scale of demand, and we think of a scale of psychological safety as well. How confident we're making our people about speaking up and sharing their point of view at work. And we give these different names. So if the psychological safety is high, everyone feels really comfortable, but what's being asked of them is not very much at all, then we can call that the comfort zone, and we don't really want to be there. If the demand is low and so is the psychological safety, so we're not feeling safe at work and nothing much is being asked of us, why bother, right? That's the apathy zone there. This one, the dangerous one, where there is a huge amount asked of us, but we don't feel safe at all, that's the anxiety zone, and that's a very stressful place to work. So what Edmondson recommends is, where we want to be, is asking a huge amount of our people, but also making them feel safe in speaking up about their experience, and that's the learning zone in that space. So that's really important. So how can we develop ourselves to develop our teams, as I've mentioned? So I'd like to introduce to you in the rest of this talk 7 practices that I've found that are essential to me in my personal development that I believe has made me a better game team leader. The first of those is based in the building of emotional intelligence. And recent research has shown that emotional intelligence is a key leadership skill, and based on a bunch of work done by another American psychologist, this is called Daniel Goleman, that has found that leaders with high emotional intelligence stand out above those with low emotional intelligence more than any other factor. So what is it, this emotional intelligence? Well, it comes down to 4 main qualities. My self-awareness, my ability to observe what I see about myself, and the ability to control what I do. And my social awareness, my ability to correctly observe the motivations and emotions of others, and my relationship management, so my ability to control my behavior and emotions in relation to other. Those 4 things together make up emotional intelligence, and being good at those things turns out to be the most important factor in making you a great leader at work. And some people believe that those skills are fixed, but it turns out actually that they're very trainable. So it's the insight of Chade Tan at Google, who created the Search Inside Yourself program, that these are very, very trainable skills. So you can improve your soft skills at work by practicing mindfulness, meditation. And that's something that's helped me hugely in my self-development, and it's given me a completely new way of operating. But it's also come from the personal into the team, and it's resonated with many others at Criterion. So we've run many 8-week, 16-hour courses, and we have a mindfulness coach who works with us 3 days a week. So would I say you learn mindfulness to be a better leader? No. I would say you learn mindfulness to be a better you, and that by being a better you, you'll become a better leader and a better team and a better game. So my first key practice of the 7 is personal authenticity. And as the famous Irish playwright Oscar Wilde said, be yourself, everything else is taken. Why do I believe that? Because I think people are crying out for purpose and meaning, and that purpose and meaning comes from truth, and you cannot provide truth if you are not personally authentic. So authenticity, being true to yourself, is the ultimate act of self-compassion, because it is painful and requires so much energy and effort to be something you're not, to wear a mask at work. And of course, personal integrity is non-negotiable. We have to do the right thing, even if no one's looking. So practice 1, personal authenticity. So how do I believe you want to engage with those you lead? Well, there's a scale of how we want to relate to others, and we can be at different points on that scale. On the left of those is pity. Actually, I think there is something further to the left of pity, but that would probably qualify you as a psychopath or a sociopath or some other dangerous mental condition. So pity, the sense of acknowledging others' struggle. Sympathy, understanding others' struggle. And empathy, I feel others' struggle. And at the right-hand side of that scale, compassion, which is I want to help others with their struggle. And I believe those 4 states map to leadership mindset as well. So I think the pity mindset as a leadership is where you see everything as broken. And if you see everything at work as broken, then you've found yourself in a victim space. And that's not a place I believe we can lead effectively from. So the best thing to do if you find yourself in victim space is to get yourself resourced by perhaps through mindfulness meditation or other things that stimulate you, or maybe you just need a rest to get out of that space before you lead others. Sympathy, if you're characterized by that, that's wanting to fix everything, and that's kind of a hero mindset, which is sometimes necessary, particularly if you find yourself in a very chaotic development position. But I don't believe it's sustainable over the long term. It takes too much energy to try and do everything on your own. A collaborator is what I would call an empathic leadership mindset, and that's worked very effectively for me, but most powerfully is what I call a servant mindset of wanting to help those I lead with their with what they need to get done at work. So my simple definition of servant leadership would be find out what your people need and get it for them. But the words need is really important. It's not find out what they want and get it for them. It's not suddenly your job to get them coffee all the time. It's about finding out what's blocking them, what's stopping them, what's helping them grow. Okay, so that's my idea about leadership. So for practice 2, that defines that leadership, it's quiet ego. So it's not about me. It's not about me coming into work to make myself feel better about who I am. It's about me coming into work to find out how I can make the talented people in my team more effective in what they're doing so that we can make a better video game. And you might have heard that phrase, park your ego at the door. If you think about it, it's actually absolutely impossible, isn't it? You can't turn your ego off. But what you can do is accept what's coming from your ego and choose not to engage with it. And again, that's something that mindfulness practice will help us develop the ability to do. So types of failure. Again, this again comes from the excellent book by Amy Emerson that I mentioned earlier. So there's a number of, failure happens all the time in a complicated video game project, right? But I think it's really useful to think of errors in different ways. So there's one type of error that we might call preventable errors. So there's where something's gone wrong, but we knew how to do it right. Then there's complex errors where complex factors have combined in novel ways to produce failures in reasonably familiar contexts. Happens all the time in video game development. You know, the data was in the right format when it went through the build process, but by the time it reached the runtime, something's changed and it doesn't work. Something's gone wrong. It's a typical game development situation, right? And we get hundreds of them, maybe dozens in a single day. And then there's another type, so what we would call intelligent failures. And so those are the undesired results of forays into novel territory. So trying to do something new, but it not working out. So if we can get this idea of there being 3 different types of failure, then as leaders of game development teams, we can react to those 3 different types of failures in different ways. So with preventable errors, we can try to reduce them. So there's maybe work we can do in our tool chains. There's maybe work we can do in our process that helps us stick to things in this situation where we know how to do it right, we do it right more often. Complex errors, all right, we try to anticipate them. We probably can't reduce them. It's probably the nature of the complexity of the work, but we can mitigate them. So we react quickly and we detect them earlier, and so that we can react to them. But intelligent errors, where we've tried to do something wrong, this is really important. Our reaction to those should be to celebrate them. That should be a great thing. If we found out something that genuinely doesn't work, I think we're closer to finding out the video game we want to ship than if we've landed in a grey area where it kind of might work, or something does work but doesn't work particularly well. So we should celebrate that and learn everything we can from that prototype or new experience that we've built inside the video game. So practice 3 is to recognize those different types of failure, treat them differently, and really the only true failure is failure to learn from what happens. So we're looking to reduce preventable errors, anticipate and mitigate complex failures, and celebrate those intelligent failures, and try to meet those failures in something more of a spirit of rather than oh no. So that we bring as a leader, because they're going to happen, is encouraging that idea of learning. So we react with an aha more than an oh no. Our team's more likely to experiment and learn quicker and fail quicker, and we're on our way to making a better video game. Okay, so 3 practices in. How can we go further, though, to use that way that we're developing ourselves as leaders to help develop our teams? And what practices can help them learn more from us and ultimately make a better video game? So first, let's talk about our attitude to their development. Games attracts a very young talent base, and we live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And so this article I noticed recently is that half of millennials and 75% of Gen Zers, that's the sort of 20-year-olds and younger, have quit their jobs for mental health reasons. So this is in America, but it's very similar in the UK as well. Whereas less than 10% of baby boomers, my parents' generation, have done that. So what that's telling me is that the work is becoming a more stressful and a difficult place for everyone. So it's really important, I believe, as leaders, that our attitude towards people is framed by this quote, which I love, from Frederick Laloux, who wrote an excellent book, Developing Organizations, that I believe we are human beings. We're not problems waiting to be solved, but potential waiting to unfold. So everyone at Criterion, I believe, has the potential to grow and develop and be the very best versions of themselves that they can be. I'm not asking them to be someone else. I'm not asking them to be like me. I'm asking them to be the best versions of themselves that they can be. And it's really important, I think, to go into that attitude when we're talking about developing our teams. But if we're going to do that, we're going to need a lot of practice which is patience. So if you're going to lead teams, you're going to need to be patient not only with yourself on this self-development journey, but also with those you lead. People are going to challenge you constantly if you're leading a game development team. It goes with the territories. And you're going to be on the end of a lot of others' ego noise, and that noisier ego tunes others out. It comes ground noise to them. So you're going to need to be patient, and it's this patient in multiple forms. So it's patience to keep believing that the talented people that you lead will find their way to access their own internal wisdom to come to the right solution for your team and for your game. And that takes patience, to not jump in and try and show them the way, and do things for them, because it doesn't scale as a leadership approach. And I actually believe, and it's been my experience through making video games, that believing in someone, especially if they don't believe in themselves, is probably the most powerful gift you can give anyone who you work with. The return on that investment is more or less infinite, in my belief. Okay, so we're nearly there. So Voltaire once said that doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. And that makes an awful lot of sense to me in the complexity and certainty that goes with making a video game. There's so many things on any given day when we come into the studio we could be working on. We could work on the core mechanics. We could be working on our audio-visual fidelity. We could be working on our second-to-second feel, our minute-to-minute progression, our hour-to-hour retention. Which is the most important? Which is the thing we should be working on now? And that constant prioritization is a really important service we have to provide our teams. And it requires us to be present, so to bring attention to the present moment, non-judgmentally, is actually at the core of mindfulness practice. So developing that skill can really help us to focus on what we really need to do right now. And if you're making a really big video game, the finished state of that video game can be quite intimidating. It can actually stop you acting in the present moment when you think, oh, so much we need to do just to get to that thing that maybe even the next demonstrable version of that game, let alone the game we want to ship. It can be quite intimidating. So to bring us back to what can make it better today, what can make it better this week, is really powerful for developing ourselves and for developing our teams. So the author Eckhart Tolle summed that up really well. He said, don't let the destination become more powerful than the next step. So the next step's the most important thing. What makes this video game better? And so we can help our teams by having fewer goals for them to work on, which are more significant in and of themselves. So that's practice 5, 2 to go. As I said right at the start, there are many different types of thinking and expertise we need on a game team, and we don't necessarily understand each other's work at that level of detail, but we do understand the benefits that we intend for the player, or for each other for that matter. So I think it's really important when we talk about how we're making our game to agree on benefits, not work. So I don't necessarily understand everything my engineers are doing, everything my artists are doing, everything my sound designers, narrative designers, game designers. I don't necessarily understand the mechanics of what they're doing. But I do understand what the benefit they intend that to have for the player. So I always ask that goals are expressed to answer a really simple question. What's the benefit and who wants it? Just tell me about the benefit you're trying to provide to what sort of player or to someone else on the team, if maybe they're working on tools and pipelines. And that really helps us collaborate more effectively, because we can all understand the intention of that. And someone hears about, oh, you're trying to achieve that benefit, the player. My work's supposed to achieve that benefit as well. And it allows us to talk more effectively from our different points of expertise about how we can come together to have a better result for the player, which is the whole point of what we're doing. So share goals and not tasks when you talk about progress on your game. And the final of my 7 set is an answer to this question. And this is something I say to people who are becoming managers on my team for the first time, is, do you want to know what everyone really thinks of you? And of course it's a trick question, because the answer can only be yes. We all want to know what everyone else thinks of us. Everyone does. And that's why I believe we owe it to the people we lead to be clear with them about their performance and about their behavior at work. So we work on compassion to ourselves in order to be compassionate to others. And it's so the American author Brené Brown would say, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. Whereas some people can make excuses to themselves to not be clear with people they're working with, because they think, oh, it's kinder, right, if I don't tell them about that thing. All we're really doing is being kind to ourselves, because we don't really want to have that difficult conversation with them. Actually, we owe it to them, and it's so important. It is the oil that lubricates a team, in my experience. And where feedback is held and not given, the team can just get stuck completely and not move on. And it can happen in small sub-teams. It can happen in big teams as well. It's so important. So my final of my 7 practices then is compassionate truth. How that compassionate truth is delivered, though, really matters. So for me, it's got to be public recognition and private feedback. When those two are the other way around, we've got a big problem. So if I'm saying in front of everyone else, that should be the place where I'm praising individuals and telling them how I appreciate it. So to go all the way back to Penn and Rigby at the start of this talk, they told us about how players want to see their actions recognized in the world, how they were more engaged and motivated if they could see the effects of what they were doing in the video game, engaged the player more and made them want to carry on playing that game. It's the same for developers. They just want to see their actions reflected. It doesn't have to be over-the-top praise that you would be embarrassed to give. It's just acknowledging that this person had this effect on the video game. These group of people had this effect on the video game. So important to teams. Equally, if there's feedback that we've got for individuals, then that has to happen privately. That can't happen in front of other people. That's a disaster. If you start saying where you think someone should adapt their behavior or their performance in front of others, that's not building an environment of psychological safety that we talked about earlier in that learning environment. So those two things are really important, and I spend a huge amount of my time at work on both of those things. And like I say, I think it's the oil that lubricates our teams. So to bring all of this together, I've introduced you to 7 practices of personal authenticity, quiet ego. The only failure is failure to learn. We're going to need patience to be present and to agree on benefits, not work, and to make a commitment to compassionate truth at work. But how do all those things come together in how we're making our video game? So I believe, and what I've found since I've come back in the new way, is that there's a new change cycle. And it's a change cycle that I go around sometimes all the way around in a day, sometimes around in a week, sometimes in a sprint, sometimes in a milestone, sometimes in a month. But I'll leave you with this idea of the new change cycle. So at the heart is the practice of focusing on now. Help your team understand the difference between urgency and importance. Everything is important, but what is truly urgent? What is the decision that has to be made now, and what can be left alone? And to make that decision, if that's the service that the team needs, remember that we're trying to give the team what they need, not necessarily what they want. From there, we have the opportunity to inspire belief in the possibility that we can succeed, that we can make this video game together, and that's going to be loved by millions of people. But also in ourselves, we can spread that widely. Remind teams how they've overcome similar challenges in the past. And inspire trust widely. People sometimes ask, new managers sometimes ask me, how do I get people to trust me? It's quite simple, really. You just have to act in a trustworthy way. But you've got to do it time and time again. You've got to show up every time. You've got to say what you're going to do. You've got to do the thing you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it, and you've got to do it over and over and over again. And that's how you build trust as a leader. But if you can do that and act in a trustworthy way, you will get trust back from those you lead in spades. So we inspire trust widely. Right, then we're looking to set their ambition in the mastery zone. So I talked about the mastery zone being beyond what we know we can do, but short of what we know we can't do, and there being that mastery zone in between. So it's true for us as individuals, but it's also true for a team. So we should be trying to make a video game that's maybe a little bit bigger and a little bit better than the one we're absolutely certain we can make, but we should keep it short of that one that as a group we're collectively sure we can't make. Then in that sweet spot there's a chance to do something absolutely amazing for our players. And you need to keep doing that right the way down to the daily goal level. So, like I said, we owe our teams feedback, and it's got to come quickly. And actually, there's many ways we can do that. We can build that into our tool chains, and our build process can tell us if things have gone wrong really quickly. We can have automated testings. We can have unit testing. We can have collective play builds together. How can we quickly learn if we're succeeding? To have those kind of intelligent failures that we want to celebrate and learn from. The quicker and more of those we can have, the quicker we get to a truly amazing game experience. And from that, the learning, and like I said, we can make that aha discovery, not that oh no discovery, because that's not the place we want to be. From there, we can go back to focusing on what we need to do right now and background that cycle, which allows us to implement that servant leadership motivation that I talked about at the start. So pulling all those things together, how do the 7 practices that I talked about help us move around that cycle? So to focus on now, we need to be present, reacting to the present moment as non-judgmentally as we can, or if we find ourselves judging it, to just acknowledge that judgment and not identify with it. A mindfulness practice can help you learn that skill. To inspire belief widely, that practice of quiet ego is essential. Your team do not want to make your video game. They want to make their video game together. So that shared vision, which doesn't obviate the need to lead, but it's not about meeting your own needs first. We need the patience to trust, like I said, to trust ourselves and to trust others widely. And to get that Goldilocks ambition that's in that sweet spot, between what we know we can't do and what we know we can do. We need to agree on benefits. So what's the benefit and who wants it? Don't talk about our work. Compassionate truth for immediate feedback. Remember, public recognition and private feedback. And for our hard discovery, our only failure is failure to learn. It's the mindset we bring together. So that's my new change cycle and the 7 practices that are going to support that. And right at the heart of it, the practice number 1, always be yourself. Remember Oscar Wilde said that. You have to be yourself because everyone else is taken. Or as Shakespeare said, be true to yourself and then you cannot be false to any other man. So that's why I believe that developing yourself is developing your team, and is developing your game. And I hope there's some things in there that you can take away to how you work on yourselves, your teams, and that you can make some amazing video games. And thank you for your time and attention and for staying all the way to the end of Games Gathering Kiev. You are the hardcore. Thank you very much for your time and attention.